All right. Well, thanks for joining, everybody. This is one of our Lunch and Learn webinars presented by Sherry Massey. She's going to present on 911 misroutes, why they're happening, and how to fix them.
Chrissy from Sherman County.
Hey, Chrissy.
Sorry, we're late.
Keeping items for everybody. If you would, mute your phones. I have no way to mute everybody, and that way we can just hear Sherry speaking. And we would prefer if you would submit questions for start meeting. You'll see the little bubble up there at the top. You can go up there and click on that and submit questions, and then we'll answer them.
Becky Snook.
Hi, Becky. Get them answered at the end of the presentation. We will, of course, post it on the website as well as the Knowledge Center. But at this time, if everybody could go ahead and mute your phones, and I'm going to throw the presentation rights over to Sherry so she can get this started. And I click the wrong thing. Did you get it, Sherry?
No, nothing came up.
It went off for me, so okay. There, I think I'm seeing your screen.
Awesome. You just seeing the one slide?
Yes.
Awesome. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. This is a really important topic for all of our 911 centers and for the people that participate in keeping data together for them. I have a good bit of information to pass along, so I'm going to roll through the presentation, but I do have some time for questions built into it. So if there's anything that you don't understand, if there's anything you'd like me to go over in more detail, let me know. So first I want to define for you what 911 misroutes actually are. These are 911 calls that end up at the wrong PSAP when they first ring. Call takers might get the name and location, also known as alley information, or they might get absolutely nothing but the call itself, so that the only information they see is a phone number and just a blank alley screen other than that. But it's at the wrong PSAP. And this can be a landline or a voice over IP or a wireless call. But today we're actually going to focus on landline and VoIP because these are the ones that have address records in the database. Wireless calls misroute, sometimes for the same reasons as landline and VoIP, but often for completely different reasons. And it's sort of beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to discuss how these misroutes actually happen and why people are noticing them more now than they used to. And to do that, I have to explain how 911 calls actually route in the first place. So someone dials 911. And when they do, their local telephone company's end office, which is the equipment that actually provides dial tone in the local area, their end office sees that it's a 911 call and forwards it to a piece of equipment called the selective router. The selective router is a telephone switch that allows the 911 call to be routed based on the emergency service number. So the selective router has to get that emergency service number in order to do the routing. And they do that, the selective router does that by querying a database using the telephone number that called in. The selective router gets that emergency service number and then uses the emergency service number to pick the right 911 center and sends the call to them. So this is how it works, or how it happens when it works. When it doesn't work, the 911 call is dialed and the local telephone end office still forwards it to the selective router. But when the selective router tries to get that ESN information out of the database, it fails. And it fails often because the telephone number that it's trying to query is not actually in the database. When that happens, the selective router says, oh, I'm going to send this to the 911 center that I think it should go to, based on which trunk the call came in on. And a trunk is just a telephone line that's designed to carry a whole lot of signals at one time. And so your local telephone company has a trunk from their office equipment in your area to the selective router. So in legacy routing, when this fails, when the telephone number does not come back with an ESN from the database, the selective router picks the 911 center based on which end office it came from, okay? But let's take a look at where that can be kind of a problem. So let's say that this end office here is maybe Abilene's end office, and it serves this area. And then this end office is Salina's, and it serves this area. But this end office is Solomon's, and it serves this area with a county line right in the middle. Well, each end office can only be pointed to a single 911 center, even if the end office provides service in 4 or 5 different counties, which some of them do. So all of the calls from end office number 2 here are going to go to either Saline or Dickinson County. They will not divide. So they're going to end up sometimes basically in the wrong place. Most 911 calls that fail to pull an ESN out of the database still end up at the right PSAP or within a PSAP or 2 of where they're supposed to be. That's how it works in the 911 routing that we're all used to. But now you throw the EZINet in there. And when it works, it looks very much like the route that we took before, except instead of the selective router checking the database, it actually forwards the call into the EZINet. So 911 is dialed, the local phone company sends it to the selective router, and the selective router sends it to the EZINet. Then the EZINet checks the database. And if it gets that information back, it's using GIS data, not ESNs, and it's using the address. But as long as it gets the data back and everything works, it picks the PSAP and sends the call to them. So this is what it looks like when it works. But when it doesn't work, and we go through that exact same process, either the address does not come back out of the database properly, or what does come out of the database doesn't work with the GIS data, and now the EZINet has to have a fallback position too. It has to route the call based on some other information. And the thing is, it, just like the selective router, chooses the 911 center based on the trunk the call came in on. But here's why we're noticing these a lot more. Because the EZINet only gets its calls from 3 places. Either the Salina selective router, the Wichita selective router, or the Topeka selective router. So when that 911 call comes in and the telephone number doesn't return from the database, in the old days, you'd get your PSAP, or maybe the PSAP next door, or maybe at the most a couple PSAPs away. But for the EZINet, when that telephone number isn't in the database, you get Salina, Wichita, or Topeka. And particularly for Wichita, Wichita serves almost the entire southern half of the state. And so literally, 911 calls that are not hitting the database properly from Morton County, Stanton County, Stevens County, Grant County in the southwest corner, or from Labette or Montgomery in the southeast corner, these calls are routing to Wichita. A lot of PSAPs have noticed this and have noticed that they have these calls that are coming in from a long way away. And this is why. really the bottom line in the whole process is that in the EZNet, misrouted calls that do not have data in the database, have a higher chance of ringing into the wrong PSAP with the EZNet than they did with the legacy routing. And that's why you're noticing these more. So how do we fix them? Well, first we have a Band-Aid, and then we have a cure. The Band-Aid is to try and make that fallback position more intelligent. And that's something that the Council is working with AT&T on right now. But there's also a cure, and for that we need your help. The cure is to actually clean up those misrouted records. So first let me show you what the Council is doing with all these pretty colors. So like I said before, calls only come from 3 places into the EZNet, the selective routers in Topeka, Wichita, and Salina. But there are multiple trunks coming down, and so we're doing some organization on the back end. We're making sure that the PSAPs that use the Salina selective router and are near Salina are going down this trunk right here that says Salina, whereas the ones that use the Salina selective router and are closer to Russell use this trunk. And the reason for that is so that we can divide these calls up, and when they don't route properly, they will end up at a closer PSAP than just all of them shooting all the way across the state to Salina. So we do think that this is going to help, but it's not actually going to solve the problem. So like I said, the PSAPs are going to be grouped into geographic areas, and the size of those areas is dependent on the number of 911 lines they have. So we can only fit so many on one of those trunks. And then for each of those groups, one 911 center is going to be classified as what the telephone company calls default. And that would be the PSAP that gets the call if there's no database information. All 911 calls for that group that fail to get information to the database will go to the default PSAP. And then the default PSAP will get transfer buttons on their Vesta screen for every 911 center they provide that service to. Now, I named out several PSAPs in there that we are thinking about as defaults, but we haven't communicated that out. I wanted to be able to explain this to everybody first. So I will be contacting PSAPs that we are considering as default to see if you're willing to do it and to make sure that the PSAP understands what the responsibility is, what we know about what the call volume might be, and what trouble it might be, everything, so that they can make up their minds. So all that you saw was just theoretical, and I will be contacting PSAPs here just shortly to discuss whether or not they are willing to be the default for their area. So that's our Band-Aid. But we need a cure. And the cure is actually cleaning up these misrouted records. And that means reporting misroutes to AT&T by submitting what is called an alley discrepancy report. This is something that has existed within sort of the 911 MSAG world for a really long time. But we have discovered recently that not a whole lot of people are submitting these. And in the past, that sort of made sense because the 911 call might come in with no information, but it was still coming to your 911 center. So as a dispatcher, I know in the past I have just looked at them and gone, oh, there was just some sort of mistake in the system. I get the address from the caller. I move on. I don't think about the fact that this has to get reported up to somebody in order to get the problem solved. Usually when I thought about reporting anything to AT&T or anybody else about 911 calls, it was because the address was crazy wrong. So because the calls ended up at the correct or near the correct 911 center, we haven't been reporting these very much. But now with all of the EZNet stuff going on, we really need to be reporting them frequently. So an alley discrepancy report is known as an alley DR, and it notifies the phone company that there was a problem with a 911 call. So when do you need to do one? You need to do one when there was no name or location information at all with the call. This is a call that is called a no record found or an NRF, and when nothing came through with the call except for the call itself, you really have to put in an alley DR. Also, when you get a call, maybe you get great information on it. It's just not in your county or just not in your PSAP's area. An alley discrepancy report needs to be filed then too. You can also file one when the address doesn't come through or came through incorrect, or when the caller says, yeah, that used to be my address, but I've moved recently and you have old information. That's also an alley DR report. But the ones that really matter are these top two. When no name or location information came through at all, that is a misrouted call because of a database failure, usually. Or when the call comes through and it does have information, but it's information that doesn't belong anywhere near you. Those are misrouted 911 calls, and you really need to be putting in alley discrepancy reports for these. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of information about the alley discrepancy reports and kind of an easy way to do this. So the first thing you've got to do is gather information. And when the 911 call comes in with bad alley or no alley, you need to print a call information report, and you click the incorrect location button on the VESTA screen. And when you do that, you get this window that comes up right here. And this window has the information from the call itself and then allows you to explain what the problem was and put all the information into it. Here's the tricky thing. It actually says submit down here. And I've talked to quite a few people who believe, for good reason, that submitting actually submits it to somebody, but it doesn't. All submitting does is make it print on your printer in the back room wherever your phone equipment is. So nobody finds out about it. It just comes off that printer. So this is step one of your process.
Hey, Sherry, I wanted to just jump in here real quick and just remind everybody if you could mute your phones. We've got a few people having a hard time hearing. Thanks.
No problem. And then make sure that the correct information is recorded. You can either use the incorrect location form that I just showed you, and this is one that was sent as an example. This is where a phone number came in. There's no record information found. So the person marked it as insufficient, and in the remarks of the form put, this is the address, should have been in a different 911 center, and this is the 911 center it should have been in. You need to gather that kind of information. And you can either do it on the form on the VESTA screen like this, or you can record the information on the Annie Alley Trouble Report form, which is a form that Lori created. It allows for a little bit more detail and also allows for some tracking. So if internally you want to keep a copy of these and mark them off when they've been completed, or if you believe you've got a local phone company that is really having issues with their records in the database, and I know some of you have had that, this form just is a little better than just scrawling notes on a printout that comes out from the phone equipment. So you're welcome to use this. It'll be available on the council website for you to use. It's just a fillable PDF. You know, or you can use just the printout that comes from the phone system. Either way, you need to grab all of the information and make sure that it gets to the person who can actually submit one of these things for your agency. So this is an example of a form filled out saying that here's this is what came up, but this is what should have come up. And then it actually has to get submitted. So ALI DRs actually have to be submitted by someone with access to 911 Net. And if you have access, you have a token that looks like this. For a whole lot of people, a vendor, a GIS vendor, either has a token or is the person that handles a whole lot of MSAG work for them. And you really need to have a chat with them before you just assume that they will be able to do these alley discrepancy reports for you. You need to make sure that you discuss this internally. Who is going to get these reports? Who's going to collect them? Who's going to get them to a person with a token? And who's going to submit them into the system? Every PSAP can have 2 tokens, and they can have more if needed, but 2 is the standard. So even if you have a vendor or somebody from another department who's handling your GIS data and they have one of your tokens, somebody in the PSAP can have the other one to submit these alley DRs. You just need to have that conversation and decide locally who is actually going to submit them. And then after one is submitted, what happens is that AT&T's database integrity unit takes over. And these are the database clerks that you guys have talked to occasionally on the phone, Sharonette Griffin, Marlene Lay. There are several around the state. But when you submit one of these alley discrepancy reports, and I will walk through later the actual steps in 911net to do that, when you submit them, what the AT&T database integrity unit does is that first they research to see if this was a network error that caused the problem or there was actually an incorrect or missing telephone record. If they determine that it's a network error, they communicate that with the people that need to know. But if they determine that it is a bad or missing telephone record, then they contact the phone company that was responsible for that phone number and give them the corrected information that you provided on that alley discrepancy report form. Then they monitor to see if and when the phone company actually fixes that record, and they send reminders out to them until they get it fixed. So this whole process can't start until you, as a 911 center, tell AT&T that there was, or CenturyLink, if CenturyLink is your database provider, that there was a problem with a 911 call. And the alley discrepancy report is how you tell them that it was a problem. So I know that was a whole lot of information, and I want to stop here before I go into how to actually submit one to take any questions anybody has about how this is happening or why, and what kind of information that you should be getting together. So you can type your question in, or if somebody has a question that they don't feel like typing and want to speak out, you can go ahead and just ask.
Sherry, this is Phil Ryan. Just a comment. There are 100 counties in Kansas that are on the AT&T system and 5 are on the CenturyLink. The 5 that are on the CenturyLink 911 system will have your own process to support that, to input the alley discrepancies. And they're just as important to get submitted through CenturyLink as well, but primarily we're focusing on how to submit it specifically through AT&T at this point. Is that correct, Sherry?
It is, and that is because the people who have AT&T as a database provider and are on the council's hosted system are the ones connecting to the EZINet and the ones that are starting to see these misroutes that are quite a distance from them. So this is an important process for every 911 center in the state. We're just focusing on AT&T because that's where kind of the visible problem has come up.
Thank you.
Gary, this is a question in what you kind of referred to earlier with fixing the records. I mean, a lot of these outgoing phone numbers for PBX systems, and we really have no idea until they come in that they don't have a record attached to them. Is there any way at all to cross-reference the phone numbers to see which ones don't have addresses attached to them and try to fix it from that angle, or is that just too daunting of a task?
It's not really too daunting of a task, but it is the responsibility of 2 people that are not on this call. And that would be the phone company that provided the PBX system to the customer and the customer. So we actually have run into this as we've assisted with a couple of companies that have a huge issue with PBX. And what we know about PBX is this. If you have a PBX or one of those big multi-line phone systems, then you have really a couple of options on how your 911 information is going to get through. First, the phone company that provided you the PBX can, you can, as I understand it, Phil, it is a customer responsibility to decide how the number comes out of the PBX system. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So you as the customer can decide, look, all of our phone numbers are going to come out when they dial 911 looking like this one main billing phone number. And if that is the case, then that billing phone number needs to be in the database just like any other telephone number, and then anybody on that PBX system that dials 911, when they do, it's going to look like that main billing number. That'll work fine for a PBX system that's in a single building or has a very limited geographic area. But when you start talking about bigger systems that are in multiple places, there is a service that the PBX customer can contract with that allows them to say, okay, if this exchange or this line calls, this is the address that you go to. If this line calls, this is the address that you go to. Either way, that has to be handled at the telephone company end and at the customer end. So if you have a PBX customer, you have a business or a local a local government agency or something like that that is using one of these PBX systems or one of these trunked SIP systems, that when they call 911 you're not getting any information, you need to communicate with the phone company and have them get with their customer about the options, because that information should be coming to you. At the very least, you should know what the main address is for that PBX system when they dial 911. And if they're really spread out, there are options for them to get proper information to you. But if you don't initiate it, what we have discovered is that not a lot of people are checking on it on the back end. Did that all sort of make sense, Don? Does that answer your question?
And when I hear you say it's basically up to the phone company, you're talking about the phone provider, not necessarily who put their PBX system in.
Right. I'm talking about the person that's providing the company that's providing the dial tone service to that PBX system.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just as kind of a heads up, because of an issue with a couple of really big PBX customers, we started having these conversations with Cox Communications. And so that's why I even know how to answer that question in some detail. But it could be that there are other providers around the state that have similar issues where they have big PBX customers that just sort of the ball got dropped. Nobody ever made the decision, and so no information at all is coming to 911. And if that's the case and you have trouble with that communication, you can always drop me a line, and we can try to go through our channels and make sure the company gets everything they need to clean this stuff up. Any other questions?
Sherry, this is Phil again. As a comment, if anybody runs across a number that you wonder whether or not it's in the 911 database, a business or whatever, you can, of course, you probably mostly know this, that you can do an ALI query on your 911 system, press the button, put in the number that is in question, and you can see if the correct location information is associated with that. So that's one way. If you have a question whether the number is in the database, you can pull it up yourself in the 911 dispatch position.
And I got a question over the over the chat about whether it would be worth putting it out to the public to check with their phone providers. And I think because these issues are isolated to telephone company problems a lot of the time, that would, in my opinion, that would cause more stress than was necessary. If the problem, if you have a whole bunch of residential phones, non-PBX systems that are coming up with no record found in the database, that is a telephone company's problem. Somebody who is providing that dial tone service is either not getting that information in to the database, or they're having some sort of technical issue, and the public can't really do much to help them solve it, and a whole bunch of people calling them and asking, is my stuff right, won't help them so much. I think by concentrating on getting this information to the telephone company through the ALI-DR, or if you have a phone company that is really having problems in your area, like, not to pick on Cox, but like this couple of big PBX customers that Cox had, then dealing directly with the phone company allows us to make sure the problem gets solved without making people worry about something that really may not be an issue for them, that's really isolated to larger customers. So I think if there was going to be a public information about this, it would be public to telephone companies, because they're the ones that need to do something about it. And to kind of give you just some idea of what I have run into dealing with local telephone companies, I have run into one where they had the same thing we all have all the time. They had an employee leave with very short notice, and the person that came and take over the position didn't understand exactly what they were supposed to do, didn't realize they were getting errors because they didn't know how to use the system as well as they should, and it took prodding them a little bit to get that to happen. I have run into phone companies that didn't know that they could download a list of the numbers that are in the database for them. So they have this automated system that's just churning in the background, and they assume everything's okay. But if they go take a look at the list, maybe their local data says they have 10,000 phone numbers, but only 5,000 of them ended up in the database. And they don't know that just because locally they're not sure how to see those errors or that kind of thing. So, I mean, this has really been a collection of just standard human error and technical error issues that we've run into as we've dealt phone company to phone company. So, I recommend that if you're having a major issue with one phone company or several phone companies in your area, that we get together and talk about how to get with those phone companies directly. If you don't see that kind of pattern, you're just seeing spotty phone numbers here and there, the ALI-DRs are absolutely the best way to get them reported. Any other questions there? Well, if you come up with something, I will have a little bit more question time at the end. But right now I'm going to step through what actually submitting an ALI-DR looks like. So how to submit an ALI discrepancy report. You go to 911net. This is the same website that you go to in order to get to GIS Director. So if you're somebody that has only ever accessed through GIS Director, it's the same website. You're just going to go to the 911net side instead of the GIS Director side. Then at the top of the screen, you have several options, and ALI is one of those. And your very first step is to try and query the number that called 911. And you put in the telephone number and a date range, and when you hit submit, it gives you all of the times that number called 911 and what kind of information came back from the database. In this case, there were a lot of 911 calls from this phone number over the course of a couple of months, and not one of them came back with record information. This particular telephone record and this query is kind of odd. You're not going to see this too terrible often, but this is what happens when one of those PBX systems doesn't have any information coming in, because they may have 5 or 6 different spots around a region that all look like one geographic place or look like one phone number because of the PBX system. And when that record isn't in the database, this comes back for every 911 call that comes through there. And, you know, we've had the 2 big customers I talked about. One of them is a local government that has a lot of facilities, and the other one is a hospital. So the likelihood of 911 calls there can be pretty big. So anyway, you do the query, and you get the list back of all the times that number is called 911 in your time period. And you pick the one you want to report on. You don't necessarily have to do it every time if they're all the same number. You're just trying to get that into the database. But here's an example. When you hit that button, this is what the query actually looks like. And you can see that it says that this is a Southwestern Bell telephone phone number. This is the information that came in for the phone number itself. This is what response came back, which was nothing. And so everything is blank there. If you don't get the call back in ALI, or in the audit query, which is possible. Maybe you don't have the specific date. Maybe you've kept a stack of these and date wasn't something that somebody wrote on them, or you have the phone number and it's just not returning when you do the query. Then you can actually, instead of querying it, you can go to Create Discrepancy Report and enter one completely blank. You put the phone number in, you put everything in, and explain what the problem was. You should enter as much information as you know into this screen. This is one reason why it's very important to have all of the call takers familiar with the process of putting together that ALI discrepancy report information. Not all of the call takers are going to come here and enter it, but all of your call takers need to know what your policy is about when they have a call come in with no address, what information are they supposed to get, where are they supposed to put it, and who are they supposed to give it to. Because they're the only ones really that know where did they actually send the ambulance or the police car or whatever on that call, what was the appropriate address, who was there, what should have happened, did they have to transfer it to another 911 center. All of that information is really important to capture time of call because you may not be able to find it later. So you enter as much as you know, as much as was collected, and hit Submit on it. And then you also have the ability here to query ALI discrepancy reports. So you can go back and look and see what kind of status it's in. So let me take a look at the ones that I've seen, or the ones that I've put in the past. How many of these has the telephone company already fixed, and how many of them are just sitting there? So if you do see some that are just sitting there, then you know, hey, you know, I can go in and begin having a conversation. My local telephone company is not looking at these. Maybe they don't understand that they're supposed to. Maybe the contact information that the AT&T database unit has for that phone company is wrong or out of date. And so they're trying to contact the phone company but not getting anywhere, so your local knowledge may be helpful there. It's just as you're putting these in, it's a good idea to every once in a while come in and query them and just kind of see where they're standing. So to summarize the whole process, we have around the state quite a few telephone numbers that are in service, but they're not in the database. And these phone numbers have got to get into the database. The more advanced we make the telephone network, the more advanced we make the entire process in order to accommodate the new forms of communication and everything that Next Generation 911 is about. The less likely it is that these numbers are going to get where they need to go. They have to be in the database. The data has to be in there and has to be correct in order for all of this stuff to work. Legacy routing, the traditional 911 routing, hid that problem, but the problem has been there for a really long time. And next generation 911 routing exposed it, but it didn't create it, and it's important to understand that. I have had at least one phone company where they thought this was something that was brand new, that these calls were all perfect until just a couple of weeks ago, and so what did we break? And the truth is these calls weren't perfect. They hadn't been perfect, some of them, for a decade. But nobody had reported them or worked on them, and since they ended up at the right 911 center, the phone company just assumed there was nothing wrong. So as you think about this and as you talk about this, remember that this is a problem that's been there for a long time. Next generation 911 just exposed it. So this may be an issue that the local phone company or that you as a PSAP have to deal with that's been that way for quite a while. We will alleviate some of the worst effects of this by doing that smarter selection of default PSAPs. And all of the network changes that have to go into place to make that new selection of default PSAPs happen is sort of in process now. Like I said, I'll be communicating with the different PSAPs to talk to them about default, and I'll be talking to them about that in the next couple of weeks. But it will be probably a few weeks to a few months before that new creative routing is fully in place. Fixing this problem completely, curing it instead of throwing a Band-Aid on it, is going to require PSAPs to submit these alley discrepancy reports when they get a call with missing or inaccurate alley information. It's a habit we all should have been in. It's a habit that didn't have the priority previously for us that it used to because things just sort of went. When dispatchers got calls with bad or missing address information, you go with the flow. That's what you do in 911. You go with the flow and you get the job done. But we need to be doing these reports to make sure that the phone companies can do their job and get these records cleaned up. Often they don't even know there's a problem if we don't start the process. So, any questions or thoughts that anybody has that they want to go over or talk about? No questions always makes me feel like I must have just done an awesome job of putting information out there. Hopefully, I didn't just babble myself and kind of not explain things to you guys well enough. Has anybody on the call been in to put in alley discrepancy reports recently?
Not recently, but yes.
You can actually view alley discrepancy reports and even enter them in GIS Director. It's something I didn't talk about earlier. But GIS Director does not have the full functionality for alley discrepancy reports. Now, the ones that you put in there do work, but you can't query phone calls. You can't query past phone calls there, and you just don't have the same number of options there. And that's the reason that my demonstration went over using 911net and not GIS Director for this, because I really think 911net is where you want to go. And West Safety Services, who does the programming for 911net, and AT&T have both assured me that alley, even in the ESINet world and even in the I3 world, the alley information is going to be maintained in 911net. So that's really the spot to go to for any of this.
Sherry, I'll just say from my point of view, this has been very informative and educational. I'm sure glad that we participated in it. You've explained some things that weren't clear to us, I don't think, and I really appreciate you putting this on because it was information that we definitely needed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do. And just to give you guys kind of an idea of the severity of the situation, we were on a call this morning where AT&T did a search in the background of the system to see just how many no record found 911 calls have there been so far in 2019. And I don't remember the specific number, but it was over 1,400. So 1,400 times just since January 1st, somebody's called 911 and no information has shown up for the dispatcher. The call may or may not have gone to the wrong 911 center, but no information was in there. And very few LEDRs have been entered. So nobody's working on those.
This is Raymond.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a certain part of the state that's worse than another?
Yes, but it's not really geography. It is exactly what Don asked about earlier. It's PBX customers. I don't want to say that that is the primary problem, but because a lot of people are, especially a lot of big organizations, are working to save money by consolidating their phone lines into these specialized systems, what you end up with is what looks like a whole bunch of calls from a single phone number. But PBX customers they account for more than half of those no record found calls. I don't find those, frankly, as disturbing as I find when residential customers aren't in the database, because that PBX stuff is a little more complex. And I get that maybe the customer didn't understand their responsibility or the phone company didn't understand theirs. But when you're talking about a simple person got a phone line and it didn't end up in the database, to me that's indicative of a really scary and bad problem, because that should be something that is old hat for everybody involved, and we want to make sure that those phone companies are aware of it. So I think even the counties that have the smallest number of these things have a big concern, because for every person that actually calls 911, you have to assume that there's several records, maybe even 100 records, that are not in that database that didn't call 911. You know what I mean? So every no record found call is an indicator of a database problem that has to get addressed.
You know, as we progress, more of these residential phones are dropping off. Everybody's going to cell phone. That's obvious. So, but the PBX is something that's not going to go away.
That's right.
Are you going to have a presentation online where we could access it so we could show some of our staff?
Yeah, absolutely. The actual presentation slides will be available, that form I talked about, and this is being recorded, and that recording will be available.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Our two biggest problems here have been the City of Newton PBX system and the hospital. And, you know, they're calling for transfers all the time on 911. We've taken to just having them call our 7-digit number just because Wichita was tired of getting all the transfer calls from us. But, you know, I think understanding now that we were approaching it from the fact that it was the hospital and their PBX provider, and now to know that it's not the PBX, it's the phone system, makes a bit of a difference on how we're going to approach this.
Well, and one of the big things that makes this a little bit difficult, going back to Raymond's question about is there a physical, a geographic area that's worse than others, we can't tell right now, because all of our attention came to this, just like yours, when these calls started routing very far away. Well, when we pull reports from AT&T on the phone calls that had no record, we're finding out where they went to begin with, not necessarily where they ended up. So, yeah, I can tell you that Sedgwick County looks awful, but that's because they've been receiving all the no record found calls for the lower half of the state. Where those calls should have started out at is a question that we can't really answer yet, because people are transferring, they're doing their job, they're moving through life like you might expect, and so they're not going back and reporting, and so we can't really get a good number on where those should have gone. We knew for a while, I think Dina Pop is on the call, I'm not sure if she's still here, we knew for a while that there was an issue with a telephone company in Barton County where those calls were routing to Reno. we got that one addressed, or at least, part of that problem, the one phone company that was really an issue. We had another phone company in southeast Kansas that had a similar kind of situation going on where a whole lot of their numbers were misrouting. And we have to do the same thing that you guys would have to do, which is we have to give the local phone company all the information and tech support that we can and put them in touch with the people who might be able to help them solve this problem. Because a lot of times they don't know that it's happening and they're not sure what a good resolution is. And so the contacts that we've built up over the course of this project have kind of helped putting them in touch with somebody who can help them. That isn't us, and it isn't necessarily the PSAP, but we do have those numbers and those contact people to help those phone companies out. Well, that was all I had, and I'm happy to answer questions as long as you guys need, but assuming that there are no more, like I said, the presentation and the recording will be online along with that form. And if you have questions or you have concerns, if you're worried about a local phone company that you think you're getting an awful lot of these from, you're welcome to contact me. But your first line of defense and your first line of service to everybody in your jurisdiction is to put in those alley discrepancy reports. And that means that you need to decide locally who's going to be responsible for doing that and make sure that all of your call takers know what information to get, where to record it, and then who to give it to. Thank you for attending, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Hey, Jerry?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, where do you go find these recordings and slides?
Has started.